Here we are, Tuesday, November 15th, 2022. I'm Larissa, and we are reading John Steinbeck, To a God Unknown. Chapter 11. The team came through the pass, the horses lifting their feet high, moving diagonally, cocking their heads at the stream, while Joseph held tight the reins on them and set the brake to shrieking. Once off the narrow place, the horses settled down, and their long journey reasserted itself. Joseph pulled up and helped Elizabeth to her seat. She settled herself primly, drew her duster about her knees, and dropped the veil over her face. "We'll be going right through town," she said. "Everyone will see us." Joseph chucked to the horses and relaxed the lines. "Will you mind that?" "Of course I won't mind. I like it. I'll feel proud, as though I had done an unusual thing, but I must be sitting right and looking right when they see me." Joseph chuckled. "Maybe no one will look." "They'll look all right. I'll make them look." They drove down the one long street of Our Lady, where the houses clung to the side of the road as though for warmth. As they went, the women came from their houses shamelessly to stare, to wave fat hands, and to say the new title gently because it was a new word. "Buenas tardes, señora." And over their shoulders they called into the houses, Ven acá, mira, la nueva señora. Vivien." Elizabeth waved back happily and tried to look dignified. Farther along the street they had to stop for gifts. Old Mrs. Gutierrez stood in the middle of the road, waving a chicken by the legs while she shrieked the advantages of this particular chicken. But when the bird lay croaking in the wagon box, Mrs. Gutierrez was overcome with self-consciousness. She fixed her hair and nursed her hands and finally scuttled back to her yard, waving her arms, crying, "No, la hace." Before they got through the street, the wagon box was loaded with trussed livestock, 2 little pigs, a lamb, an evil-eyed nanny goat with udders suspiciously shrunken, 4 hens, and a gamecock. The saloon belched forth its customers as the wagon went by, and the men raised their glasses. For a little while they were surrounded by cries of welcome, and then the last house was gone and the river road was before them. Elizabeth settled back in the seat and relaxed her primness. Her hand crept through the crook of Joseph's arm and pressed for a moment, and then remained in quiet there. It was like a circus, she said. It was like being the parade. Joseph took off his hat and laid it on his lap. His hair was tangled and damp, and his eyes tired. "They are good people," he said. "I'll be glad to get home, won't you?" "Yes, I'll be glad," she said suddenly. There are some times, Joseph, when the love for people is strong and warm like a sorrow." He looked quickly at her in astonishment at her statement of his own thought. "How did you think that, dear?" "I don't know. Why?" "Because I was thinking it at the moment. And there are times when people and the hills and the earth, everything except the stars, are one, and the love of them all is strong like a sadness." "Not the stars, then?" "No, never the stars. The stars are always strangers, sometimes evil, but always strangers. Smell the sage, Elizabeth. It's good to be getting home." She raised her veil as high as her nose and sniffed long and hungrily. The sycamores were yellowing, and already the ground was thick with the first fallen leaves. The team entered the long road that hid the river, and the sun was low over the seaward mountains. "It'll be way in the middle of the night when we get home," he said. The light in the wood was golden blue, and the stream rattled among the round rocks. With evening, the air grew clear with moisture, so that the mountains were as hard and sharp as crystal. After the sun was gone, there was a hypnotic time when Joseph and Elizabeth stared ahead at the clear hills and could not take their eyes away. The pounding hooves and mutterings of water deepened the trance. Joseph looked unblinkingly at the string of lights along the western mountain rim. His thoughts grew sluggish, but with their slowness they became pictures, and the figures arranged themselves on the mountain tops. A black cloud sailed in from the ocean and rested on the ridge, and Joseph's thought made it a black goat's head. He could see the yellow, slanting eyes, wise and ironic, and the curved horns. He thought, "I know what that is really there, the goat resting his chin on the mountain range and staring in on the valley. He should be there. Something I've read or something I've been told makes it a fitting thing that a goat should come out of the ocean." He was endowed with the power to create things as substantial as the earth. If I will admit the goat is there, it will be there, and I will have made it. This goat is important, he thought. A flight of birds rolled and twisted high overhead, and they caught the last light on their flickering wings and twinkled like little stars. A hunting owl drifted over and shrieked his cry, designed to make small groundling creatures start uneasily and betray themselves against the grass. The valley filled quickly with dark, and the black cloud, as though it had seen enough, withdrew to the sea again. Joseph thought, I must maintain to myself that it was the goat. I must never betray the goat by disbelieving it. Elizabeth shivered slightly, and he turned around to her. Are you cold, dear? I'll get the horse blanket to go over your knees. She shivered again, not quite so well, because she was trying to. I'm not cold, she said, but it's a queer time. I wish you'd talk to me. It's a dangerous time. He thought of the goat. What do you mean dangerous? He took her clasped hands and laid them on his knee. I mean, there's a danger of being lost. It's the light that's going. I thought I suddenly felt myself spreading and dissipating like a cloud, mixing with everything around me. It was a good feeling, Joseph. And then the owl went over, and I was afraid that if I mixed too much with the hills, I might never be able to collapse into Elizabeth again. It's only the time of day, he reassured her. It seems to affect all living things. Have you ever noticed the animals and the birds when it's evening? No, she said, turning eagerly toward him, for it seemed to her that she had discovered a communication. I don't think I've ever noticed anything very closely in my life, she said. Just now it seems to me that the lenses of my eyes have been wiped clean. What do the animals do at evening? Her voice had grown sharp and had broken through his reverie. I don't know, he said sullenly. I mean, I know, but I'll have to think. These things aren't always ready to hand, you know, he apologized. And he fell silent and looked into the gathering darkness. Yes, he said at last, it's like that. Why, all the animals stand still when it comes dark evening. They don't blink their eyes at all, and they go dreaming. He fell silent again. I remember a thing, Elizabeth said. I don't know when I noticed it, but just now. You said yourself, it's the time of day, and this picture is important in this time of day. What? He asked. Cats' tails lie flat and straight and motionless when they're eating. Yes, he nodded. Yes, I know. And that's the only time they're ever straight, and that's the only time they're ever still. She laughed gaily. Now that the foolish thing was said, she realized it might be taken as satire on Joseph's dreaming animals, and she was glad it might. She felt rather clever to have said it. He did not notice what construction might be put on the cats' tails. He said, over a hill, and then down to the river wood again, and then out across the long plain, and we'll be home. We should see the lights from the hilltop. It was very dark by now, a thick night and silent. The wagon moved up the hill in the darkness, a stranger to the hushed night. Elizabeth pressed her body against Joseph. The horses know the road, she said. Do they smell it? They see it, dear. It is only dark to us. To them, it is a deep twilight. We'll be on top of the hill in a little, and then we may see the lights. It's too quiet, he complained. I don't like this night. Nothing is stirring about. It seemed an hour before they breasted the hill, and Joseph stopped the team to rest from its climb. The horses sank their heads low and panted rhythmically. See, Joseph said, there are the lights. Late as it is, my brothers are expecting us. I didn't tell them when we would come, but they must have guessed. Look, some of the lights are moving. That's a lantern in the yard, I guess. Tom has been out to the barn to see the horses. The night was thick on them again. Ahead they could hear the heavy sigh, and then it rode up to them, a warm wind out of the valley. It whisked gently in the dry grass. Joseph muttered uneasily, There's an enemy out tonight. The air's unfriendly. What do you say, dear? I say there's a change of weather coming. The storms will be here soon. The wind strengthened and bore to them the long, deep howling of a dog. Joseph sat forward angrily. Benji has gone to town. I told him not to go while I was gone. That's his dog howling. It howls all night. Every night he goes away. He lifted the lines and clucked the horses up. For a moment they plodded, but then their necks arched and their ears pivoted forward. Joseph and Elizabeth could hear it now, the evening clattering of a galloping horse. Someone is coming, Joseph said. Maybe it's Benji on his way to town. I'll head him off if I can. The running horse came near, and suddenly its rider pulled down almost to its haunches. A shrill voice cried, Senor, it is you, Don Joseph? Yes, Juanito, what's the matter? What do you want? The saddled horse was passing now, and the shrill voice cried, You'll want me in a little while, my friend. I'll be waiting for you at the rock in the pines. I did not know, senor. I swear I did not know. They could hear the thud as the spurs drove in. The horse coughed and leapt ahead. They heard it running wildly over the hill. Joseph took the whip from its socket and flicked the horses to a trot. Elizabeth tried to see into his face. What's the matter, dear? What did he mean? His hands were rising and falling as he kept tight rein on the horses and yet urged them on. The tries cried on the rocks. I don't know what it is, Joseph said. I knew this night was bad. Now they were in the level plain, and the horses tried to slow to a walk, but Joseph whipped them sharply until they broke into a ragged run. The wagon lurched and pitched over the uneven road so that Elizabeth braced her feet and grasped the arm handle with both her hands. They could see the buildings now. The lantern was standing on the manure pile, and its light reflected outward from the new whitewash on the barn. 2 of the horses were lighted, and the wagon drew near. Joseph could see people moving about restlessly behind the windows. Thomas came out and stood by the lantern as they drove up. He took the horses by the bits and rubbed their necks with his palm. He wore a set smile that did not change. You've been coming fast, he said. Joseph jumped down from the wagon. What has happened here? I met Juanito on the road. Thomas unhooked the reins and went back to loosen the tugs. Why, we knew it would happen sometime. We spoke about it once. Out of the darkness, Rama appeared beside the wagon. Elizabeth, I think you better come with me. What's the matter? Elizabeth cried. Come with me, dear, I'll tell you. Elizabeth looked questioningly at Joseph. Yes, go with her, he said. Go to the house with her. The pole dropped, and Thomas skinned the harness from the horses' wet backs. I'll leave them here for a little, he apologized, and he threw the harness over the corral fence. Now come with me. Joseph had been staring woodenly at the lantern. He picked it up and turned. It's Benji, of course, he said. Is he badly hurt? He's dead, said Thomas. He's been dead a good 2 hours. They went into Benji's little house, through the dark living room and into the bedroom, where a lamp was burning. Joseph looked down into Benji's twisted face, caught in a moment of ecstatic pain. The lips grinned off the teeth, and the nose was flared and spread. $50 lying on his eyes shone dully. His face will settle some after a while, Thomas said. Joseph's eyes wandered slowly to a blood-stained knife which lay on a table beside the bed. He seemed to be looking down from a high place, and he was filled with a strange, powerful calmness, and with a curious sense of omniscience. Juanito did this, he said with a half-question. Thomas picked up the knife and held it to his brother, and when Joseph refused to take it, he set it back on the table. In the back, Thomas said, Juanito rode to Nuestro Señor to borrow a dohorner for that longhorn bull that's been raising so much hell, and Juanito made the trip too quickly. Joseph looked up from the bed. Let's cover him up. Let's spread something over him. I met Juanito on the road. He said he didn't know. Thomas laughed brutally. How could he know? He couldn't see his face. He just saw and stabbed. He wanted to give himself up, but I told him to wait for you. Why, Thomas said, the only punishment of a trial would be on us. Joseph turned away. Do you suppose we'll have to have a coroner out? Have you changed anything, Tom? Well, we brought him home, and we pulled up his pants. Joseph's hand rose to his beard, and he stroked it down and turned the ends under. Where's Jenny now? He asked. Oh, Burton took her home with him. Burton's praying with her. She was crying when she left. She must be nearly hysterical by now. We'll send her home to the east, Joseph said. She'll never do out here. He turned to the door. You'll have to ride in and report it, Tom. Make it an accident. Maybe they'll never question. And it was an accident. He turned quickly back to the bed and patted Benji's hand before he went out of the house. He walked slowly across the yard toward where he could see the black tree against the sky. When he was come to it, he leaned his back against the trunk and looked upward, where a few pale, misty stars glittered among the branches. His hands caressed the bark. Benjamin is dead, he reported softly. For a moment he breathed deeply, and then turning, he climbed into the tree and sat between the great arms and laid his cheek against the cool, rough bark. He knew his thought would be heard when he said it in his mind. Now I know what the blessing was. I know what I've taken upon me. Thomas and Burton are allowed their likes and dislikes. Only I am cut off. I am cut off. I can have neither good luck nor bad luck. I can have no knowledge of any good or bad. Even a pure, true feeling of the difference between pleasure and pain is denied me. All things are one, and all a part of me. He looked toward the house from which he had come. The light from the window alternately flashed and was cut off. Benji's dog howled again, and in the distance the coyotes heard the howl and took it up with their maniac giggling. Joseph put his arm around the tree and hugged it tight against him. Benji is dead, and I am neither glad nor sorry. There is no reason for it to me. It's just so. I know now, my father, what you were. Lonely beyond feeling loneliness. Calm because you had no contact. He climbed down from the tree and once more reported, Benjamin is dead, sir. I wouldn't have stopped it if I could. Nothing is required in satisfaction. He walked toward the barn, for he must saddle a horse to ride toward the great rock where Juanito was awaiting him. 12. Rama took Elizabeth by the hand and led her across the farmyard. No crying now, she said. There's no call for it. You didn't know the man that's dead, so you can't miss him. And I'll promise you, you won't ever see him, so there's no call for fear. She led the way up the steps and into her comfortable sitting room, where rocking chairs were fitted with quilted pads and where the Rochester lamps wore china shades with roses painted on them. Even the braided rag rugs on the floor were made of the brightest underskirts. You have a comfortable place, Elizabeth said, and she looked up at the wide face of Rama, a full span between the cheekbones, the black brows nearly met over the nose, the heavy hair grew far down on her forehead in a widow's peak. I make it comfortable, Rama said. I hope you can do as well. Rama had dressed for the occasion in a tight-bodiced, full-skirted black taffeta, which whispered sharply when she moved. Around her neck, upon a silver chain, she wore an amulet of ivory, brought by some sailor ancestor from an island in the Indian Ocean. She seated herself in a rocking chair, of which the seat and back were covered with little flowers and petite point. Rama stretched her white, strong fingers on her knees like a pianist sounding a practice chord. Sit down, she said. You'll have a time to wait. Elizabeth felt the strength of Rama and knew she should resent it, but it was a safe, pleasant thing to have this sure woman by her side. She seated herself daintily and crossed her hands in her lap. You haven't told me yet what has happened. Rama smiled grimly. Poor child. You were come at a bad time. Any time would have been bad, but this is a shameful time. She stiffened her fingers on her lap again. Benjamin Wayne was stabbed in the back tonight, she said. He died in 10 minutes. In 2 days he'll be buried. She looked up at Elizabeth and smiled mirthlessly, as though she had known all this would happen, even to the smallest detail. Now you know, she continued. Ask anything you want tonight. There's a strain on us, and we are not ourselves. A thing like this breaks down our natures for a time. Ask anything you wish. Tonight. Tomorrow, we may be ashamed. When we have buried him, we'll never mention Benji any more. In a year, we will forget he ever lived. Elizabeth sat forward in her chair. This was so different from her picture of homecoming, in which she received the homage of the clan and made herself gracious to them. The room was swimming in a power beyond her control. She sat on the edge of a deep black pool and saw huge pale fishes moving mysteriously in its depth. Why was he stabbed, she asked. I heard Juanito did it. A little smile of affection grew on Rama's lips. Why, Benji was a thief, she said. He didn't want the things he stole very much. He stole the precious little decency of girls. Why, he drank to steal a particle of death, and now he has it all. This had to happen, Elizabeth. If you throw a great handful of beans at an upturned thimble, one is pretty sure to go in. Now do you see? Juanito came home and found a little thief at work. We all love Benji, Rama said. There's not a frightful span between contempt and love. Elizabeth felt lonely and shut out and very weak before Rama's strength. I've come such a long way, she explained, and I've had no dinner. I haven't even washed my face. Her lips began to tremble as she remembered one by one the things she was suffering. Rama's eyes softened and looked at her, seeing the bride Elizabeth now. And where's Joseph? Elizabeth complained. It's our first night at home and he's gone. I haven't even had a drink of water. Rama stood up then and smoothed down her whispering skirt. Poor child, I'm sorry, I didn't think. Come into the kitchen and wash yourself. I'll make some tea and slice some bread and meat for you. The tea kettle breathed huskily in the kitchen. Rama cut pieces of roast beef and bread and poured a cup of scalding yellow tea. Now come back to the sitting room, Elizabeth. You can have your supper there where it's more comfortable. Elizabeth made thick sandwiches and ate them hungrily, but it was the hot tea, strong and bitter, that rested her and removed her complaints. Rama had gone back to her chair again. She sat stiffly upright, watching Elizabeth fill her cheeks to full of bread and meat. You're pretty, Rama said critically. I wouldn't have thought Joseph could pick a pretty wife. Elizabeth blushed. What do you mean? She asked. There were streams of feeling here she couldn't identify, methods of thinking that wouldn't enter the categories of her experience or learning. It frightened her, and so she smiled amusedly. Of course he knows that. Why, he told me. Rama laughed quietly. I didn't know him as well as I thought I did. I thought he'd pick a wife as he'd pick a cow, to be a good cow, perfect in the activity of cows, to be a good wife and very like a cow. Perhaps he is more human than I thought. There was a little bitterness in her voice. Her strong white fingers brushed her hair down on each side of the sharp part. I think I'll have a cup of tea. I'll put more water in. It must be poisonously strong. Of course he's human, Elizabeth said. I don't see why you seem to say he isn't. He is self-conscious. He's embarrassed. That is all. And her mind reverted suddenly to the pass in the hills and the swirling river. She was frightened and put the thought away from her. Rama smiled pityingly. No, he isn't self-conscious, she explained. In all the world, I think there isn't a man less self-conscious, Elizabeth. And then she said compassionately, You don't know this man. I'll tell you about him, not to frighten you, but so you won't be frightened when you come to know him. Her eyes filled with thoughts, and her mind ranged for a way to say them. I can see, she said, that you are making excuses already. Why, excuses like bushes to hide behind, so you need not face the thoughts you have. Her hands had lost their sureness. They crawled about like the searching tentacles of a hungry sea creature. He's a child, you say to himself. He dreams. Her voice turned sharp and cruel. He is no child, she said, and if he dreams, you will never know his dreams. Elizabeth flared angrily. What are you telling me? He married me. You are trying to make me a stranger of him. Her voice faltered uncertainly. Why, of course I know him. Do you think I would marry a man I didn't know? But Rama only smiled at her. Don't be afraid, Elizabeth. You've seen things already. There's no cruelty in him, Elizabeth, I think. You can worship him without fear of being sacrificed. The picture of her marriage flashed into Elizabeth's mind when, as the service was going on and the air was filled with its monotone, she had confused her husband with the Christ. I don't know what you mean, she cried. Why do you say worship? I'm tired. You know, I've been writing all day. Words have meanings that change as I change. What do you mean by worship? Rama drew her chair forward so she could put her hands on Elizabeth's knees. This is a strange time, she said softly. I told you at the beginning that a door is open tonight. It's like an All Souls' Eve when the ghosts are loose. Tonight, because our brother has died, a door is open in me and partly open in you. Thoughts that hide deep in the brain, in the dark, underneath the bone, can come out tonight. I will tell you what I've thought and held secret sometimes. In the eyes of other people, I've seen the same thought, like a shadow in the water. She patted softly on Elizabeth's knee as she spoke, patted out a rhythm to her words, and her eyes shone with intensity until there were red lights in them. I know men, she continued. Thomas, I know so well that I feel his thought as it is born. And I know his impulse before it is strong enough to set his limbs in motion. Burton, I know to the bottom of his meager soul. And Benjy, I knew the sweetness and the laziness of Benjy. I knew how sorry he was to be Benjy and how he couldn't help it. She smiled in reminiscence. Benjy came in one night when Thomas was not here. He was so lost and sad, I held him in my arms until nearly morning. Her fingers doubled under, making a loose fist. I knew them all, she said hoarsely. My instinct was never wrong, but Joseph, I do not know. I did not know his father. Elizabeth was nodding slowly, caught in the rhythm. Rama continued. I do not know whether there are men born outside humanity, or whether some men are so human as to make others seem unreal. Perhaps a godling lives on earth now and then. Joseph has strength beyond vision of shattering. He has the calm of the mountains, and his emotion is as wild and fierce and sharp as the lightning, and just as reasonless as far as I can see or know. When you are away from him, try thinking of him and you'll see what I mean. His figure will grow huge until it tops the mountains, and his force will be like the irresistible plunging of the wind. Benjy is dead. You cannot think of Joseph dying. He is eternal. His father died, and it was not a death. Her mouth moved helplessly, searching for words. She cried as though in pain, "I'll tell you, this man is not a man unless he is all men." The strength, the resistance, the long and stumbling thinking of all men, and all the joy and suffering too, canceling each other out and yet remaining in the contents. He is all these, a repository for a little piece of each man's soul, and more than that, a symbol of the earth's soul. Her eyes dropped and her hand withdrew. "I said a door was open." Elizabeth rubbed the place on her knee where the rhythm had been. Her eyes were wet and shining. "I'm so tired," she said. "We drove through the heat, and the grass was brown. I wonder if they took the live chickens and the little lamb and the nanny goat out of the wagon. They should be turned loose, else their legs might swell." She took a handkerchief out of her bosom and blew her nose and wiped it harshly and made it red. She would not look at Rama. "You love my husband," she said in a small, accusing voice. "You love him, and you are afraid." Rama looked slowly up, and her eyes moved over Elizabeth's face and then dropped again. "I do not love him. There is no chance of return. I worship him, and there's no need of a return in that. And you will worship him too, with no return. Now you know, and you needn't be afraid." For a moment more she stared at her lap, and then her head jerked up, and she brushed down the hair on each side of the part. "It's closed now," she said. "It's all over. Only remember it for a time of need. And when that time comes, I'll be here to help you. I'll make some new tea now, and maybe you'll tell me about Monterey." There is a quote from Faulkner, and I'm going to mess it up. I'm not going to get it exactly right. I know that. Only women can cohabitate in hatred. It's not the exact quote, but that's very close to what it is. And Rama hates Elizabeth, hates her, resents her. If I were Rama, I'd hate and resent Elizabeth as well. Elizabeth isn't very likable, is she? She's childish and foolish and naive. She feels like she left the child of herself before coming into the valley, but that child's still there. And it has to be for what's coming in the book, in the story. It's so well written. God bless Benji. Rest in peace.